I may not be the first person you want to invite to your next party, but let me explain. So oftentimes when you meet somebody new at a party, you say, what's your name, your favorite color, your favorite food, right? That's what you do. But then inevitably the question comes up, so what do you do for a living? And when I get asked that question, I realize I'm about to lower the bummer. Because I usually respond with, well, I actually lead an organization that deals with issues of human trafficking and slavery right here in Richmond. You can imagine after that, the mood gets a little more somber as questions about sex trafficking, forced labor, violence, and torture, and just how big of an issue that is here. And there is something to be said about the response we have when an injustice is so horrendous and human suffering so great. There's this visceral response that surges through us. It kind of whispers and screams to us all at the same time saying, this shouldn't be so, this can't be right. My introduction to this issue of human trafficking and slavery started about 8 years ago on a long forgotten corner of the world, MySpace. No, sorry. I don't want to give that away. I got trigger happy. So as funny as it is to say, MySpace actually changed my life. Sure, it was the first site that my wife and I messaged each other back and forth after we first met. It was adorable. And it was also the first place that made it okay to take selfies of yourself in your parents' bathroom mirror with the flash on. And don't act like you didn't do it, or still don't do it. But it was also the first place that I saw the name of this organization called the Blind Project that focused on human trafficking in Southeast Asia. And this is where I first heard the story of Amira. Amira was a young girl from Thailand who was promised by a family friend an opportunity to move to a larger city, to get a job, to go to school. And for her in her small rural town, this was not really possible. Her economic opportunity was very low. Access to education was extremely low. So at this opportunity, she jumped and her family jumped because of what it meant for them. So she decided to go with this trusted person, but when they got to the larger city, that wasn't the case. She was taken to a brothel and told that if you try to leave and if you don't comply, you'll be beaten or worse. Amira was trapped immediately with no opportunity to get out, and she was only 16. You can imagine that my entire world in this moment was shattered in how I saw it. I had thought the world was this good place full of possibility and opportunity because it was for me, but I had been wrong this entire time. I now lived in a world where people are bought and sold like commodities. And I now lived in a world where there are more people enslaved today than at any point in history. Of course, at first I felt paralyzed, I felt overwhelmed, I felt consumed, I felt despair and hopelessness, but I knew I had to do something. I was 22 at the time, and for about 3 years, my wife and I had conversation after conversation dreaming what this thing could be, and then one day we finally mustered up enough courage to look each other in the face and say, let's do this. And that's the day Greyhaven began. Now, we knew immediately this thing was going to be huge. It was going to be a huge success. By year 2, we'd be liberating thousands of people. Millionaires would be dropping their money at our feet, begging us to do something about this. People would be clamoring for just a moment of our time, these modern-day heroes of abolition. But a few years in, none of this had happened. And we were on the very edge of giving up. One night, my wife and I were talking about what to do about dinner. We had about maybe a little less than $5 in our bank account and only condiments in the fridge, so not a very good recipe unless you want baked ketchup. And I remember going to our room, scrounging up enough change to walk to the Chinese restaurant around the corner to buy a carton of General Tso's chicken for us to split. And on the way there, I was thinking about all of these leaders and nonprofits and causes and movements that in the moment when they were just about to give up, something amazing happened to change their story. A random check for $20,000 came in the mail from an anonymous donor. Every day after I thought of that story, I checked the mail waiting for my check, but it never came. After a lot of pity parties and constantly comparing myself to everyone else's story, this question popped into my head. If my story isn't like everyone else's, if that check never comes in the mail, and if things don't get easier, am I just going to give up? And just in that moment when I was ready to give up, and we pushed through to try to continue to build something is when we met Melanie. Melanie was a girl here from Richmond. She was 15 years old. She's straightforward, determined to make her mark on the world. I would not mess with her, but she'd been trafficked and exploited in horrendous ways right here in our community. You see, human trafficking is this really complex, nuanced, and multifaceted issue. But in its core elements, you have a person that is vulnerable. And then on the other side, you have this person that will exploit that vulnerability, the perpetrator. But there's one other group of people that will ultimately decide if slavery persists. It's us. It's us who are free from slavery and exploitation. It's us who have the opportunity, the privilege, the beautiful response to do something about it, to protect the poor and the vulnerable among us. And when we decide and make the conscious effort to engage a complex issue, all of the reasons why it's not going to work will begin to stack up. For us, when we set ourselves on a trajectory to eradicate or end this issue just in our community, we were asking for adversity face to face. And it quickly settled in that it was going to be way more complicated, way more difficult than we thought. We would fail, we would make mistakes, we would fall, and we would be imperfect in our pursuit. The author Brené Brown calls this space the dense fog of uncertainty. It's the space when the hero of the story has to overcome seemingly impossible odds in order to adapt to a new reality to resolve a major conflict. This is the space that lay before us and all of the complexity that faces us in the world. This is the space that we have to go through if we want to see change come. You see, these multifaceted issues are really complex, and it actually affects our brain in a really interesting way. So our brains actually interpret uncertainty as a threat. As human beings, we want safety, we want stability, we want the known, but it actually treats it like it's a disease, like something is wrong with us. So if it is part of our neurological predisposition to reject something like uncertainty, then why do we still crave significance, meaning, purpose, and to change the world when there are no guarantees? William Wilberforce, who was a key person in the abolition of the slave trade in Britain, had no certain path that he would succeed, but he did it anyway. Martin Luther King Jr., who united people under a banner of love and unity and equality and action, had no certain path or no certain guarantee that he would succeed, but he did it anyway. As Malala Yousafzai continues to fight and advocate for girls' access to education, there's no certain path forward, but she does it anyway. Why? Because the greatest threat to our world and to ourselves is not uncertainty and not the unknown. The greatest threat is if we allow uncertainty and the unknown to prevent us from doing what we can to make the world brighter and safer. When I was in that moment of dense fog of uncertainty, when I was paying for General Tso's chicken with spare change, I was in that moment where I was going to decide, will I push through this or will I stay where I am? And then it was because we said, yes, we're going to push through this, that girls like Melanie are now free and building their lives, pursuing family and education and building a new business. And it's because we come together and we face these really complex issues in our world that we begin to see that there is hope. You see, our hope is that ultimately we will have a world free of exploitation. We'll have a world free of slavery where all people are free. And hope is kind of a funny thing. It never promises that it's going to be easy, but it does promise that it's going to be worth it. So my invitation to you is to come with me, join all of us in spaces of complexity and uncertainty and see what beauty we can make of it. I think that that's a future worth making. Thank you.